The Jets are in Pittsburgh this weekend. What do they need to do to get their second win of the season? We'll discuss today on the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Friday, September 30th, the final day of September in the year 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you for making the show your first listen or your first watch every day. This podcast is free, and it's available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit the subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening. You'll never miss an episode. And if you happen to be watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps the channel out, and it helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Brite.co Jewelry and Watch Insurance. Brite.co brings you comprehensive, fast, and affordable jewelry insurance for as low as $5 per month. Check out your special offer for Locked On listeners and get covered in under 2 minutes at Brite.co/Locked On. That's Brite.co/Locked On. Well, the Jets are on the road this weekend. They will face the Pittsburgh Steelers Sunday at 1 o'clock. Jets looking to even their record in the 2022 season at 2-2, and they complete their run through the AFC North. Kind of a scheduling quirk this year. The Jets' first 4 games are against the 4 AFC North teams. When the schedule first came out and I saw that, I figured the NFL must have a new philosophy this year, that I figured everybody's playing the same division the first 4 weeks, and I looked at it, and I don't think there was another team where the schedule worked out like this. Just kind of an interesting way the league scheduled the Jets this year. It ends with a trip to Pittsburgh. They'll face Mitchell Trubisky in a stadium where the Jets have had a lot of pain. Back in 2004, Jets had that horrible loss in the divisional round. 2010, they lost the AFC Championship game there. This stadium has brought the Jets a lot of pain. In fact, the Jets only have one win in franchise history in Pittsburgh. And you also may remember from last year, the Jets have never beaten the Philadelphia Eagles. So the Jets have one victory in the state of Pennsylvania in non-preseason games. That will need to change this weekend if the Jets want to get back to 2-2. Today we're talking about the game. Now, the folks at BetOnline.ag have the Steelers as 3-point favorites. And that's notable because the general consensus is that home field is worth about 3 points. So if the Steelers are 3-point favorites at home, it tells you that the bettors view these teams as equal. The odds makers view these teams as equal. And that's not something you would expect because the Jets have had such a rough time over the last decade. And the Steelers have been one of the great franchises in the league. It's been a very long time since they've had a losing record. In fact, they have never had a losing record under head coach Mike Tomlin. They've been one of the great organizations the last 50 years in the NFL. Very rare to have them down, but it feels like they're kind of down this year. They have issues at the quarterback position. You know, the defense really has not looked as great as a vintage Steelers defense. This team is beatable. That doesn't mean the Jets will win the game. In the past, we've seen the Jets lose plenty of games against teams that are beatable, but this is not your typical Jets-Steelers game. Now, the Jets do have some challenges in this game, and they come at the tackle position. And the Jets' tackle woes come at kind of an inopportune time because, in good news, Zach Wilson's going to be back in the lineup this weekend. The Jets, of course, announced earlier in the week that the starting quarterback is returning to the lineup. I think I speak for many of us when I say thank goodness. I don't think I could watch Joe Flacco again. Now, of course, there are no guarantees Zach is going to be spectacular, but I'd rather watch Zach Wilson than Joe Flacco this weekend. That's for sure. There are big expectations on Zach. Last year did not go his way. And this year, the Jets are going to look for more. He's got to, I feel like, play at a competent level. I don't think Zach Wilson needs to be a superstar. I don't think, you look back to when the Jets drafted him second overall and expectations were so high. Maybe down the road we can talk about that, but first Zach Wilson has to look like a credible NFL quarterback. Last year, he really struggled, I felt like, moving within the pocket. I felt like the reads were an issue most of the year. The accuracy was not there. And I said over the course of the offseason, even late last year, it's either going to click in a big way or we're going to have major concerns because I think we're past the point with Zach Wilson where we can just write off any struggles as, oh, he's a young quarterback, he's a rookie. of course, young quarterbacks are going to struggle at points. There's no question about that. I'm not expecting Zach Wilson to play at an MVP level. You occasionally have a young quarterback, a second-year quarterback play at that level, but usually they have a great infrastructure around them, whether it's Patrick Mahomes with Kansas City, Lamar Jackson with Baltimore, Joe Burrow. The Bengals may not have been a full team last year. They may not have been a team with no weaknesses, but they had overwhelming strength at the skill positions. The Justin Herberts of the world and even Justin Herbert has some really good receivers, but there aren't many young quarterbacks who can play at a super high level without the greatest infrastructure around them. And I think the Jets have done a decent job. I think the Jets have done a good enough job supporting Zach where you can expect Zach, or you should expect Zach, to play at a competent level, to look like a guy who belongs. And it's got to be the type of situation where you look at him and you say, wow, that's not the same guy we saw a year ago. It's going to go one of two ways. Either there's going to be vast improvement, I feel like, or it's going to be the type of thing we always go through with these Jets quarterbacks where you can talk yourself into it. There's some statistical indicator that's slightly higher. You can say, well, maybe this was an issue, maybe that was an issue, maybe the Jets could have helped the quarterback out more here or there. But I got to say, I think it's going to feel pretty hollow if we're in that dilemma, because Zach Wilson needs to step up. The Jets have done, if not a spectacular job, they've put decent receivers around him. I think if you look at Garrett Wilson, through 3 weeks, he looks like a guy who's a budding number one receiver in this league. Elijah Moore, maybe off to kind of a slow start, but his numbers aren't terrible. Corey Davis, who is much criticized, is a competent receiver in the NFL. He's not your number one receiver, but if Corey Davis is your third receiver, you're not in bad shape. The Jets have given Zach Wilson a couple of good running backs to take the pressure off him. He's got to step up. There's two aspects of this. One is that Zach's got to deliver on his own. The Jets also do need to support him. The Jets, despite the names I gave you, it doesn't really matter if the players I mentioned don't produce. I think frequently with young quarterbacks, we look to make excuses for them. I think frequently we assess all of the problems to their surroundings. That's what we've done for years with the Jets. It's natural. You want the young quarterback to succeed, so you try and talk yourself into it. But really, you got to see more from Zach this year. You got to see the Tampa game last year, Week 17. That was the game that really kind of stuck out at me. I don't think the highs were as high as they were early in the season against Tennessee, where he carried the team on his back, maybe the one time all season during his rookie year. But against Tampa, he felt comfortable in the pocket. He was making assertive reads. When that back foot hit, he was getting the ball out decisively to the right receiver and accurately. And unfortunately, that kind of went away the next weekend against Buffalo, which I guess if you wanted to, it's an easy enough game to excuse because the pieces around him were so bad in that game. But I'm going back to what I'm saying. I mean, I feel like for most of the year, there were things you could isolate with Zach Wilson in 2021 that just were not good enough. And it's easy to give a blanket excuse that he was a rookie quarterback. Well, okay, those days are over now. Now we're in year 2. And I think another thing that has to be said is I don't think rust is really a great excuse because he's been practicing. The Jets made a whole big deal out of they did not place him on injured reserve because they wanted him to continue to practice. So I don't think it'll be fair to say if Zach Wilson struggles on Sunday that he's rusty. Of course, it's one game. You don't want to make too much out of one game. I think that's the more valid rationale you can come away from Sunday's game with if things don't go well. But ideally, we want to see Zach take a big step forward. And that does not mean 4 touchdowns. It means not only avoiding mistakes. Late last year, he avoided mistakes, but they were not making many big plays. It's mainly about figuring out when to take the shots. A quarterback who just checks everything down, well, that's Joe Flacco. You may not make mistakes, but you're not going to make many plays. A quarterback who's reckless is going to turn the ball over too frequently. You need to find the right balance of being aggressive and being safe. Easier said than done. That's why there aren't many quarterbacks in the league who are effective. That's why there aren't many quarterbacks. That's why it's so hard to find a quarterback. Zach Wilson needs to take the first step on Sunday. But of course, he's not the only part of the offense. The Jets have some things they need to figure out on that side of the ball. And as we continue on this Friday episode of Locked On Jets, we'll talk about what the Jets need to do on offense against this Pittsburgh Steelers defense. Of course, the Jets are hoping Zach Wilson will be a great success on Sunday. But of course, there's the other end of the spectrum. You see it all the time if you're a fan of watching blooper videos on YouTube. The guy trying to get engaged, popping the question, and something happens. He falls out flat on his face. The boat tips over. You don't want to be that guy, and you don't want it splattered all over the internet. Well, the guys at BriteCo Jewelry Insurance will make sure you get a replacement at the full value of your ring, no matter whether it's lost, stolen, or you just can't figure out what happened to it. Go to Brite.co/locked on. It's the fastest, easiest, and cheapest way to cover yourself with the best jewelry insurance in the business. The guys at BriteCo are geniuses. They've made buying insurance for your engagement ring, your watch, or whatever so easy that you can get covered in 2 minutes on your cell phone. You won't find a better deal on great coverage that's super affordable. Brite.co/locked on. I know we all hate insurance, but these guys at BriteCo have made the whole experience easy. It's probably the easiest thing you can do for yourself this week. You got no excuses. It's $5 a month. You can get totally comprehensive coverage, and it won't take you more than 2 minutes on your cell phone. Check it out at Brite.co/locked on. And you want to check out the videos, those fail videos I was talking about. They're hilarious. There's a bunch of them at Brite.co. See for yourself at Brite.co/locked on. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. This show's free and available on all platforms. We're talking Jets Steelers. Sunday, Pittsburgh, 1 o'clock Eastern time. Jets trying to get to 2-2 on the season. Zach Wilson making his first start. We talked a lot about Zach in the first segment. Now let's talk about the players surrounding Zach. I think there's one major area of concern, and I think you know it if you've been following the Jets this week, if you've been following the Jets the last 2 weeks. It's the tackle position. And whenever you lose a tackle, it kind of has this snowball effect, because one of the ways the Jets have kind of helped Max Mitchell, the rookie, get through a tough spot, being a fourth rounder, first year, a guy who wasn't supposed to be playing, they've sent extra help his way. I think that's contributed to George Fant's struggles, because last year George Fant got a lot of help in what was the best season of his career. Was it really that Fant was spectacular? Well, no, he was okay. I mean, he was good, but the Jets were also able to help him out. This year, because Mitchell's been on the right side of the line, they haven't been able to help Fant out as much. Now Connor McDermott's in the lineup, and it's almost like you got to help McDermott out a lot. So the question comes down to, do you just leave extra guys in on both sides? Do you chip on every play with both guys? That can limit your passing game. Now, that may not be the worst thing in the world, because if you're trying to simplify things with Zach Wilson, maybe running a bunch of 2-3-man patterns could help him out. It could make the game easier for him, but it does limit your passing game, because even if like a guy's, a typical progression, there's usually only 2 to 3 guys in it. But when you send 5 guys out, even if somebody's not in the progression, you force the defense to account for him. It's a defender who's occupied, who's not blitzing, who's not covering the primary read on the play. So it makes it more challenging. And through the week, I've talked about a game the Jets played in Pittsburgh 12 years ago, where they just decided, you know what, we're just going to live with it. And they essentially played 6 offensive linemen a bunch of the game. They used a backup guard, Robert Turner, essentially as an extra tight end, and they used him to help out a backup tackle, Wayne Hunter, who was stepping in for Damian Woody. The Jets might need to do something like that this week. I don't love this Alex Highsmith matchup against McDermott. The Jets are a little bit lucky because they don't have to deal with TJ Watt in the lineup. I mean, TJ Watt's against McDermott. I mean, that could get really ugly, but Jets need to figure out a way to weather the storm. I think one way that definitely could help is getting the run game going. The Jets' run game has really not gotten rolling. You've gotten good performances out of Michael Carter and Breece Hall, but they haven't really been able to take this offense to the next gear. I was expecting this to be a run-first offense. Now, part of it's been they've been so far behind in these games. People always talk about the Jets' run-pass ratio. I think that's a result of how far behind the Jets have been in a lot of these games. The second half of 2 of these 3 games, they've had to throw nonstop because they've been so far behind. Hopefully this week, and part of this is going to be on the defense, but the Jets need to keep the score closer so they can rely on the run game. This run game was supposed to be the thing that the offense was based on. That 1-2 punch where you could keep both guys fresh, where you could wear defenses down for the fourth quarter. And when you're committed to the run game, sometimes that means you take some marginal gains in the early going because you want to wear a defense down, and then you're able to pop a couple in the fourth quarter. Jets haven't really been able to get there at this point. I think another key aspect is the Jets are probably going to need to design some quick hitting plays. I mean, they may want to design some touches in space for Garrett Wilson and Elijah Moore. I think Wilson also is going to help here because he's just so effortless getting open. I use the word effortless all the time, but it's just so true. He creates separation so easily. I feel like that's going to be a young quarterback's best friend. when you're a young quarterback in this league, windows are not that wide open. Most windows, most of the time you have to throw before the guy's open. You have to anticipate. When you have a receiver who can break open and get a couple yards of separation, it makes life easy because not only do you not have to throw into a tight window, you don't really have to worry that much about the progression, making reads. You can just see the guy's open, so you can get him the ball. So I think some quick hitting plays, some design touches and some quick hitting passes to Garrett Wilson will help. But I think as well, these tight ends, and these tight ends have done nothing. Now listen, people are going to throw Tyler Conklin's statistics at me. Tyler Conklin, in situations outside of garbage time, and I'm defining garbage time as the Jets down by 2 touchdowns or more in the second half. So let's throw those situations out. Tyler Conklin has 40 receiving yards. Now, the only thing you can say for that is that's 8 times the total CJ Uzama's got. These Jets tight ends have combined for 45 in 3 games, 45 non-garbage time yards. Do you think that's good enough? Yeah, great. Tyler Conklin's a great fantasy player. He's putting up fantasy points in irrelevant situations that do nothing to help the Jets. Yeah, if you want a guy who's going to catch a bunch of checkdowns when the game's over, Tyler Conklin's been your guy so far. The Jets are paying a lot of money to these tight ends. And part of it's going to be blocking. So part of it's not going to be receiving. Because, listen, they've been giving you nothing at the receiving game. If they can help you out blocking this week and help out McDermott and help out Mitchell, then maybe we'll talk about giving them some credit here. Because what they've done so far is simply not good enough. And I think that the help the Jets give these tackles is going to go a long way toward determining how effective this offense will be. But of course, the Jets defense needs to show up. They have not been doing that the last couple of weeks. And ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about what the Jets need to do on that side of the ball in order to win this game. That's as we continue on this Friday game preview. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Friday, we're talking about Jets Steelers, Sunday, 1 o'clock. I'm calling it Heinz Field. I'm not calling it the new name. In Pittsburgh, can the Jets get their second win of the season? Can the Jets get their second win all-time in Pittsburgh, their second win all-time in the state of Pennsylvania? One thing I'll say about this Steelers team, they don't have that great of an offense. That Mitchell Trubisky's really been struggling. I was a little surprised they did not turn to Kenny Pickett after last week's Thursday night loss, because they had a few extra days to work in the young quarterback. Listen, on paper, the Jets seemed like a pretty easy game, relatively speaking. That seems like an ideal situation to put the young quarterback in, but they stuck with Mitchell Trubisky, who's been struggling. Trubisky's a guy I refer to as an anti-game manager, because he can just destroy your chances of winning a game. And it's interesting because when you have a young quarterback, typically the guy you bring in as the bridge starter is somebody who's going to be steady, somebody who may not make a ton of plays but isn't going to make the big mistake. Trubisky's kind of the opposite, because he'll lose you games. I mean, he'll throw terrible interceptions. He'll just be dumb with the football. But you do worry a little bit because Trubisky occasionally gets hot. And when he gets hot, he can carry a team. And it doesn't happen often enough for Trubisky to be a franchise quarterback, but it happens enough to make you a little bit worried. So I still think, despite the lack of dynamic passing attack the Steelers have this season, the Jets do need to be careful in this game. And I worry a little bit because this defense has not been playing up to par. This is a defense that got lucky 2 weeks ago against Cleveland, because they gave up 30 points. They did nothing well, and nobody was talking about it after the game because the Jets had that miracle comeback, that amazing comeback. They that comeback let the defense off the hook. Last week, they were not as lucky. They played a miserable game. They did nothing well again. 2 straight weeks. All the additions, all the resources that have been poured into this defense, and the Jets are getting the same results as they did a year ago. Something's got to give. Now, one thing I will say is that when we talk about Trubisky, we talk about how he could get hot. I do like these Jets corners. These Jets corners are not the problem right now. They're not a weakness. Last year they may not have been that bad, but this year I think it's a strength. This year I think these corners give the Jets a leg up on defense. If everybody else was playing like the corners, I think the Jets defense would be in pretty good shape. So that's the one thing that does give me a little bit of hope against this Pittsburgh passing attack. The other thing that gives me hope is just how bad they've looked so far. And I think this is the type of game Quinnen Williams really needs to shine. We talked earlier in the week about how Steelers, even if we don't know exactly what their line's going to look like, but best case for them, they may have a starter who's a little bit banged up. So Quinnen Williams, I think Quinnen Williams gets too much grief. I think he takes way too much criticism from this fan base. I think it's not fair to expect even the 3rd overall pick to be a superstar. That's just not how it works. If you get that, you love it. But I don't think you need to be a superstar as the third overall pick as a defensive tackle to be a success in this league. I think Quinnen Williams is a success. I think if you look at him on a play-to-play basis, he's winning, he's doing his job, he's making this defense better. But this is the type of game. You don't need it to happen every week. This is the type of game Quinnen Williams needs to take over, where you got opponent that's struggling, where you got an offensive line that's looking a little shaky. This is the type of game where Quinnen Williams needs to throw up like a 2-3 tackle for loss, 2 sack kind of game. This is the one time where I'm going to say that it's time for Quinnen Williams to step up, and it's time for the Jets to take advantage. Jets are not forcing turnovers here, and that's one of the issues. Trubisky is a guy who he can get hot, but he also can put the ball in danger, and it's in the game like this, protecting the football can make all the difference in the world, because both of these offenses have their issues. So giving an offense a short field, if not scoring points on the other side of the ball, that can be the type of thing that swings the game. That could provide you the margin that you're looking for. That could provide the team that wins the margin of victory. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. If you enjoy the show, please give it a 5-star review. It helps the channel out tremendously. So does giving this episode a big thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. If you like the show, also consider subscribing to it. You'll never miss an episode. You'll get notifications as new episodes are posted. Hope you enjoyed the game this weekend. Just a little programming note. I've been doing post-game podcasts on Sundays after Jets games. I will not be able to do that this week. I will continue this as the season goes along. I just have a personal commitment on Sunday. So we'll chat again on Monday to break down the game.